Hello, BookTube, and welcome back to Book Trek 2023, the Summer of Trek. This is a 3-month-long event created by Vin at Revenant Reads. We're on our third year now of celebrating Star Trek fiction. And for 2023, we are doing all summer long, but we're doing very, very relaxed. There are no categories anymore, no strictures for what incarnation of the show or what time period or anything like that. Instead, it's just the two basic tenets of Book Trek. One is to read a Star Trek novel. If you read one Star Trek novel this summer, you're fine. And the other, if you want, is an away mission where you can read either a book written by someone connected with Star Trek, or you can read a book of popular science. And I'm not going to do the first one. I'm not going to read any books by people connected with Star Trek. I have done my duty in those trenches. Thank you very much. Popular science is on my reading list anyway, for this summer and any summer. It's one of the genres that I very actively read. So that'll probably be coming up for Book Trek. But I'm spending most of my time reading Star Trek fiction, and spinning the wheel. And I spun the wheel last night and decided to reread a bit of newer Trek. All the classic old Star Trek, the numbered Star Trek original series novels. I've read all of those, and many of them many times. I've read lots and lots of others. I think I've read every Voyager novel, almost every Deep Space Nine novel for my sins, plenty of Next Generation novels, special event novels, crossover event, things like that. But later on, especially when you started to approach the dawn of the Abrams Star Trek movies, the Kelvin timeline, once that happened, once those lens flare movies happened, well, suddenly you've got a viable cinematic property that isn't set in the Roddenberry timeline at all, which starts to make the original Roddenberry timeline look a little bit antiquated. For a while there, you wondered, is Star Trek ever going to return to the Roddenberry timeline? Or are they just going to stay in an alternate Kelvin timeline and tell stories there, some of which might be good. But as time went on, as it became 1 year since the last Star Trek on network TV went off the air, then 2 years, then 10 years, a lot of those earlier properties seemed a little bit done. They seemed concluded. So if you were a writer and you were thinking, well, I want to interest an agent in selling a Voyager novel to Pocket Books, if you got a response at all from Paramount or Pocket Books, they'd have said, well, we have a kind of an ongoing fictional universe, an interconnected fictional universe for what happens to the Voyager crew once they get back home. And if you want, we can send you a 200-page book series Bible of what's going on there. You can get up to speed and tell another chapter in that story. But you have to read all the other books first, because you have to play off them. Much like the Star Wars extended universe. And if you, as a writer, had told your agent to tell Pocket Books and Paramount, well, no, I just want to tell a random story of Voyager during the years when they were in the Delta Quadrant. I don't want to be part of this interconnected, multi-author, connected universe of Voyager fiction that's coming out now. You'd get a resounding no. There would be no interest in such a thing. If you wanted to tell an adventure of, just a thing that happened on Deep Space Nine, the answer would be no. And largely the same thing with the original series, even though the original series was very episodic. So you could work in literally almost any number of adventures, provided you don't destroy anything fundamental. Even there, the idea would be, why? Why would you do that? If you want to do that, well, we do have an ongoing, slowly expanding, interconnected fictional universe of novels set in the original Roddenberry timeline. In all time periods, in the Next Generation's time period, in Voyager's time period after it gets back from Earth, in Deep Space Nine's time period after the conclusion of the TV show, and in the original series. We have ongoing fictional universes in all of those properties. And if you study up, you can do something like that. I've said before on Book Trek, that does not really appeal to me. I didn't really get it with Star Wars Extended Universe, and Star Wars took it to comical extents, where there were times there years ago where a new Star Wars novel would come out, and your homework to understand anything that was in it was to read 15 other novels, 15 novels that had come before it. And you could easily see Star Trek getting that bad, Uh, this was true with a series set in a space station that was nicknamed Vanguard. And that series, the Vanguard series, was at least theoretically designed to address something that Star Trek fans always wondered about, which is surely it's not Kirk's Enterprise that's the starship that's having all the adventures. Surely other starships are having adventures. What are they? What about a Star Trek story that isn't connected with Kirk's Enterprise at all? That was kind of the basic seedbed of the Star Trek Vanguard series. Those novels were sort of in series. There was very little about Vanguard that was standalone. And the Enterprise and all of its crew and captain were involved, I think, to a greater extent than the original creators thought, probably because the powers that be at the publishing house or at the studio said, well, yeah, okay, it's a Star Trek novel, but if it doesn't connect with the Enterprise in any way, it's fan fiction, and you can write all the fan fiction that you want, but if you publish it, we'll sue you, and we're certainly not going to publish it ourselves. And maybe there was some sort of pushback like that. This has to be a little bit more connected to Kirk's Enterprise, and you can't really tell a separate storyline unless you're Peter David. You've got that kind of cachet with the fans. You might be able to get away with it, but otherwise, no. And some of the Vanguard books are very good. And they have a regular sort of bad guy, the Shaddai, that run throughout a couple of those books, and also regular starships and characters who show up at the space station and who are not Kirk. They are not the Enterprise. And one of those is Clark Terrell of the Starship Sagittarius. And fans will know Captain Terrell because he is in Star Trek: The Wrath of Khan, where he's the captain of the Reliant and is captured by Khan Noonien Singh and eventually infested with a brain worm and has a heroic end. He has a wonderful heroic end where he kills himself rather than kill Captain Kirk. It's a good turn in the movie, and as such, it opens Clark Terrell up to being a perfect choice of a character to expand. We get all of his crew on the Sagittarius. We get, all of the different Star Trek alien races. There's one of almost each on board his vessel. And we get their adventure in an area of space called the Taurus Reach, which features very prominently in the Vanguard novels. There's a planet in the Taurus Reach where when young people come to maturity, they metamorphose into, in a blast of energy, they metamorphose into fierce monsters. And the original series villain, Klingon Commander Kang, has been sent by the Empire to figure this out. What is this process? Can it be mined? Can it be taken advantage of? And the Sagittarius is there also to figure it out and maybe to figure out what to do with these people, even though they're bound by the Prime Directive. So there is a plot line here, and it's largely supposed to be free of Captain Kirk and the Enterprise. It's largely supposed to be exactly what fans have often wondered about and clamored for, which is the adventure of a Federation starship other than the Enterprise. And I read this thing almost 10 years ago when it came out. The book that I chose is Seekers #1. This is by David Mack. The novel's name is Second Nature. And I chose for this particular episode of Book Trek a reread. I almost never reread these modern Trek novels at all. I just had a really bad experience reading one called The Fearful Summons for a second time. But I read this when it first came out, back in 2015 or something like that. I wrote a review of it. If I remember, I'll leave a link to it. And I kind of sort of liked it, but when I read it the first time, I knew what this thing was trying to do. That thing that I just described is what it was trying to do. And I also knew that it kind of failed because at periodic intervals, the plot and the narrative touches base with Jim Kirk. It touches base with all sorts of things that are central to his adventures. It touches base with his Enterprise. I'm not saying that the Enterprise runs in to save the day, but this definitely wasn't completely free of them. And maybe I understand why. I'm not sure that it was David Mack. It might have been just the powers that be at the publishing house saying, this can't be completely free of our marquee characters. Right? When we looked at for instance, the story submission guidelines for Strange New Worlds, one of the guidelines for those stories was that you can't do this. You can't have, yes, there are a million stories out there in the Federation, but you can't tell one and submit it for this anthology, it has to be somehow connected to canon. It can't just be separate, just completely separate, a day in the life of an Alpha Centauri colonist. It can't be that. No matter how good you might do that. I'm sure that might be good, but you can't do it. This does that, or tries to. It comes as close as a novel can. So I thought I'd read it again after, so many years and see if it did anything more for me. And it did. It did more for me. The Captain Terrell's girl boss second in command is as annoying now as she was then, but a lot of the other members of the cast and crew of the Sagittarius are very interesting. And Kang is done fairly well in this book. He's a tricky Klingon to do because, as we see in Day of the Dove, he does have redeeming qualities. He's big and loud and savage, but he has a nobility to him that we get that fully fleshed out in Deep Space Nine. But this book does it fairly well. This was not a bad revisit, but I don't know. I was going to say it isn't as good a revisit as a lot of those original series Star Trek novels, but that's probably not true. Probably that's just nostalgia. Probably if I was coming at those things cold, I wouldn't find them very revisitable. Maybe I'll revisit one again tonight. But that's my Book Trek report for today is Second Nature by David Mack, which I read for the second time. And was good. It was good. It wasn't anything more than that. It was good. The idea of the change, the idea of these beings that explode into a new incarnation when they come of age, that was fairly interesting, fairly well done. Maybe I need my canonical crew. Maybe that's what I do. Maybe that's just it. Maybe it's a limitation on my part. I'd love to know what somebody would make of this if they knew nothing about Star Trek. If they came to this on its own, would this be satisfying if you knew nothing about any incarnation of Star Trek from the small screen or the big screen? But the thing about Star Trek is that you can't find someone like that. So I don't know where you would find someone to read this in isolation, to read this without knowing who Jim Kirk is. Anyway, that's my field report for Book Trek. I'll be back next time with another book, and we'll see what I find then. Thank you, BookTube.